So what we're looking at with a lot of these things, let's say in, as I'm going to show you, entire underwater cities, okay, is probably that first destruction around 50,000 or 51,000 years ago. Then there was another one around 28,000 years ago. There was another one at 22,000 years ago. And the last age of Atlantis began around 21,000 years ago and ended around, 12,000 or 11,750 years ago. So we want to look at what's off the coast of Cuba, because this is really interesting. This is Cuba, and off the coast here, and I'm going to give you a even better map. They found about a half mile down the western coast of Cuba, all these large stones in rectangular shapes. Here we are with Cuba again. So off the coast of Havana, this whole area, they have found incredible structures. These are high resolution sonar images of large structures a half mile down on the white sand floor, the western tip. And this came forward in 2000. This expedition was directed by owners of advanced optical digital communications in Havana. And you can see they can't even get down to these structures. Now, this is a closer view of them, which is quite amazing, looking like, again, a pyramid. And I have a little better photograph here. And you can see these are clearly temples or buildings of some sort that have gone down. Here's something that looks like a sphinx. Yep, like with a little paws, and not sure what that is. Okay. And it looks like a little strange man on top of it. Okay. But these look like temples, and you can see a dolphin. Here's another image. And here's, and you can see it's all encrusted with, sea debris. That's because it's been down there probably for thousands and thousands of years. Here we have another one that literally looks like New York City. These are like gridded streets that have gone down underwater. And of course, all this has pretty much been covered about by the traditional news. You don't hear it on the nightly news. Here again, looks like an entire city went down with roads and everything, gridded, just as we grid a lot of our cities today. Here is, again, this Atlantean temple off the coast of Cuba, just sitting there in the water. Here are, the columns of the post from whatever this temple was. This is a small replica. You can see the serpent here. Very much like a small version of, the large pyramid at Chichen Itza, which I've been to see many times. And of course, they have the serpent energy coming down that you can see on the equinoxes, the spring and summer equinoxes as the light descends. So the serpent and the puma and the eagle or condor were three of their great symbols. Now, Cuba, of course, is close. Here's Cuba to the Bermuda Triangle. Here's Florida, okay? And also the Sargasso Sea. This is a topographical map of depth. So you can see this part is even deeper. This is shallower, and this is gigantically deep. This is where the Sargasso Sea starts. And this was the part of Atlantis that really went down around 51,000 BC when they misused that antimatter crystal. And then once there were exoduses around, 28,000 and so forth, a lot of this was, all this was land. This, later this went down too. And in fact, Edgar Cayce talks about the Hall of Records and how there were three of them, and one of them is under the water in this area because the Atlanteans rebuilt in this area. And in fact, there's even like concentric rings, like a replica of the original capital here. But this is Cuba, which is pretty darn interesting. So here is, again, Norfolk, Virginia, and so forth. And here we see the Sargasso Sea. This is the area where when sailors go through this area, it's eerily quiet. It's like something weird happened and you can feel it. But it's because it was an antimatter device. And this is one of the reasons we have the weird Bermuda Triangle there. There's an underwater pyramid that periodically goes off and opens up interdimensional doors. So let's take a look at what the other islands are in this area, the Caribbean. The Caribbean islands. Here again is topography. You can see how far down it went. Goodness gracious, it's a lot. So this is what we find in the Caribbean. Incredible ruins, just absolutely incredible. And here we see like the bull horns of Hathor, who was she was the Egyptian goddess of healing with the sun disk at the foot of the temple. And look at the size of these statues next to the divers. I mean, if you had this diver stand here, his body would probably be this tall. That's a guy, he's probably about 6 feet tall. You can see how large these are. These are very enormous. So, of course, this looks very much like Hathor, the god. This was her symbol, was the cow of fertility, you know. And again, we see more of this and all sorts of other ruins that are there. Just amazing. Wouldn't it be fun to go diving there? I'd really love to do that. You know, maybe that'd be a great trip. So we also see this very interesting lion with his paw on this globe, which represents the world. Why? This is one of the great symbols of Atlantis because it was the height of its last 2,000-year age was the flood happened at the end of the age of Leo, just at the beginning of Cancer. And right before Cancer, which is a water sign, came in, the Great Flood. That makes sense, of course. So here we find it in India, around the city of Dwarpa. We find it this is in the ruins of Egypt. This is a city called Heracleion. Hera, remember the goddess Hera? She was the wife of Zeus. This was on the northern part of Egypt, where it empties into the Mediterranean. And this city disappeared and was discovered really only in the last 20 years. And they've pulled out all these incredible statues from there. But once again, we see the lion with his paw on the globe. So this is one of the symbols of Atlantis, the conquering of the world. Where else do we find these kinds of ruins? Now we're getting close to the real Atlantis. This would be the Azore Mountain Islands, which again, I would just love to go there. It's so beautiful. The Azores officially belong to Portugal, which is interesting. And they have an incredible underwater park. I'm going to show you some pictures of, called the Donna Ana Park. That's got a lot of ruins too. But the Azores are a set of islands that were part of the islands close to Atlantis. And they found some remarkable things there. This is from about 12,000 years ago. So this is obviously shot from above in the ocean, looking down. They figure that this, they've been able to estimate the width of the pyramid, 254 feet, 330 feet, and these were 100 feet each. So this looks like is some kind of an enclosure around it. Who knows, maybe whether it was a town or fort, or I mean, who knows what it was, but it was something. And you can see it's pretty covered up now. These divers have found several of these large pyramids down underneath the water there, and this is one of them. And they go back around 12,000 years when the Great Flood occurred. And again, this is another one as they're going by. And you can see here it's close to the islands, and they've estimated the height and of the pyramid. So it's just extremely interesting to me that this isn't in the regular news. Now, I'm just going to show you a couple of things from the Donna Ana National Park. There's a lot to say about this as well, but we only have so much time. So this is actually a photograph. No, it is not Photoshop. These are barracudas, okay? Here is Athena. Well, we know her, don't we, from Greek, cosmology or theology or mythology or whatever we want to call it. Here's the head of her. And of course, it's from the Parthenon, Athena was the goddess who was the patron goddess of Athens, which was the capital of ancient Greece. And the Greek civilization goes back much further than we realize, to probably about 9,000 BC, where there was an advanced civilization. So these gods and goddesses that were tall, long-lived, wisdom, some of them wisdom teachers, certainly Athena were extraterrestrials who were overseeing and teaching humanity for a long period of time. This is also from the Donna Ana National Park. And you see, here's a diver, there's his scuba tank, here's his arm, here's his leg, his little flipper, okay? You kind of get a sense of the scale of how big these doors are. And here, again, we see a winged lion. So, I mean, why is it, here's a submersible sub here. Here's some fish, okay? Why don't we see this in the news? So these are some images of the Azores, and this is what Atlantis would have looked like really in its fertile areas. They had a lot of volcanoes. Now, these are sunken calderas, which are basically volcanoes that have collapsed within themselves because the lava got spewed out. And now there are these beautiful lakes and these gorgeous mountain ranges. And of course, it has the red, black, and white and yellow stones that we hear about in Atlantis. This is very beautiful. And again, I have probably 30 images of the Azores, but we have a lot to cover. So forgive me for just flying through this so quickly. I know I'm sort of just giving you a taste of this, all of this, but there's a lot to say. Now, some people have speculated maybe Atlantis was in the Far East, okay? In fact, we have discovered that during the Ice Age, all these areas were up. In other words, this is India, okay? And this is, I think this is maybe New Zealand. Maybe this is India. Anyway, this is all area that was up. This is Ceylon, I think, and this is India. So this has got to be like, I don't know what's down there, Thailand or whatever. And this looks like it's kind of New Zealand, but all this would have been above land. Recently with Australia, I don't know if you guys have heard, but they're saying to the east of Australia, they're saying there's another continent, and I'm sure it was part of Lemuria or Mu. So certainly there are land masses. And again, you can see the line is what we think of as where it is today. But when it colors outside the lines, it shows us where the land masses once were. So this would have been New Zealand. Here's Australia. This is the area where they're saying that new continent has been found, or old continent. Okay, so that was probably Indonesia. So these were much earlier ages where we were aware of the mermen and the mermaids. Certainly we've had mermaids and mermen on this planet. We probably still do if the sonar experiments with the Navy haven't murdered all of them with, you know, because they're acoustically so sensitive, just like whales and dolphins. Now, this is an age of what were called the Rishi kings, and there were 7 Rishi kings, and this would be like having the Dalai Lama, you know, 7 Dalai Lamas basically rule. This was a very high consciousness age, a golden age in many ways. It doesn't mean there weren't some bad people, but by and large, society was a righteous society where everyone was trying to do the right thing. And the story of the Ramayana is a story of Rama and his wife Sita, and he was a prince who was destined to get the throne, but by some misfortune, he was wronged, and he and Sita had to leave the palace and go and live in the forest, and his best friend went with him. And along that time, Sita was taken by a demon called Ravana, or Ravana, I think, Ravana. And Ravana basically kidnapped her and wanted her to be his, girlfriend. And so Rama had to find a way to get her back. And this is what the Ramayana's story was really about. These are incarnations, let us say, like Jesus and Mary Magdalene, or St. Francis of Assisi and Clare, or, they come as emissaries from the higher worlds, male and female together, Krishna and Radha, Rama and Sita. So these were 2 very pure, high consciousness beings who came to inspire people in their age. And it was a different age. Now, this is the journey that Rama took in order to, from his original kingdom, to go down, and he had to find a way to get onto this island. And I think this is called Ceylon. But there wasn't a bridge there. What could he do? So he wound up being befriended basically by beings we don't have on the planet anymore. They were like monkey men, but they could talk and everything. And they helped to build this land bridge. And this is what the myth is. Now that we have sonar, we have discovered that, in fact, underneath the water, exactly where they say the land bridge was, here is this land bridge of stones that was built by Hanuman. That was the Monkey King's name, Hanuman's people. And here we see it with satellite imagery. And of course, through this, Rama was able to cross the land bridge with an army of animals, basically conscious animals. This was an age when we could hear them speak. And of course, we've closed our ears down to them mostly now. And he was able to fight against this Rakshasa, Ravana, who was a bad guy. Who knows? They call him Rakshasa, was considered a demon. So, what was he? Was he a extraterrestrial? Was he a reptile? Was he a demon? I don't really know in this day and age. All we can do is go by the story. But basically, this is what NASA has shown us, is that this land bridge exists. And you can sort of see from here the shallow area where there was once, long ago, the land itself. So many things that we think of as myth and story and legend are actually based on something true. Now, we're jumping from that. Again, I have a lot more things I can say about that, but we're going to look at one of our last ones, which is discoveries near Okinawa in Japan. This would not be Atlantis. This would be Lemuria or Mu. But I want to show you just a few of these because of the scale. The scale of the buildings is incredible. They were first found around March 1995, and you can see, if these are steps, imagine how big a beam. You'd have to be a 20 to 30 foot tall beam to walk up those steps. So this is a much, much earlier age. Lemuria came before Atlantis, and then it overlapped it. Same kind of thing here. Look at the scale. So as recently as 1996, a sports diver discovered a huge 40 foot below the surface angular platform off of Okinawa. And then they began to really investigate. So teams of divers then came and found one monument, one pyramid, one pavilion, one city after another. Grand boulevards, majestic staircases, archways, enormous blocks of stone, all cut and fitted perfectly. Not like anything we've ever seen, especially because of the scale. And of course, Japan, is a very smart technological country, and their professionals jumped on all over this. And so what's interesting is you can see, again, this is a diver. There's his fin, his legs, his torso, his arms, and see the scale of these buildings. They're just absolutely unbelievable. And so in September, not far from Yogaguni, more than 300 airline miles from Okinawa, they found another gigantic pyramidal structure 100 feet underwater. Again, with broad promenades and pylons and buildings 240 feet long. Again, this shows you the scale. But what's interesting about this is we didn't hear a word about it in the US until the Ancient American magazine broke the news. And again, CNN, is the only station that even covered it. Nothing was mentioned in any of the other archaeological publications or newspaper. And so this is kind of part of this whole cover up, and why programs like this are so important is because how do we find out about these earlier ages? It's like they're afraid to tell us for fear we'll think, oh my gosh, this could be us, or were there giants on the planet? Well, I mean, what's the big deal? It says it in the Bible, so it's not going against the traditional Christian or Jewish religion, or the Muslim religion for that matter, which are the three Abrahamic religions. So this was part of Lemuria, basically. And of course, that's a whole nother conversation. But the islands that we have in the Pacific, which are Easter Island, the Pitcairn, the Marshall Islands, Easter Island, all of those are remnants of what was a big civilization. And this, of course, is where they're saying this other shelf that appeared to be part of a continent was. So, is this exactly accurate? We can't say. But we know that there definitely were civilizations here, and it was called the land of the rising sun. And those who fled from it, a lot of them went to Australia, they went to Japan, which became the land of the rising sun. They went to China. So that's a whole other conversation about how Lemurian civilization was different and more, let's say, feminine and intuitive and spiritual than some of the earlier phases of Atlantean history. Atlantis, went more towards the technological development eventually. So where was Atlantis? That's the question we started been and why is it surfacing today and why is it important to us? So Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean. And, you know, at one point, and this is the Damen-Hur version, which is, I think, pretty accurate for the last incarnation of Atlantis. Here's the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and Poseidia was here. This is a map of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And what I want you to notice is this would have been, here's Portugal, and the Azores are here. So Atlantis would have probably been right in here in that last incarnation of itself. In earlier incarnations, it would have been all the way over here. But when they blew up, this is the Sargasso Sea, when they blew up using the antimatter device, Atlantis, this whole section went goodbye. Okay, so then you had a section that kind of came across for the next area in this area. And then in 28,000 BC and 22,000 sections of that went down as well. So then we have the last big one. And here we can see that Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and we can see the tectonic plate very, very clearly, the outline of what would have maybe been long, long, long ago, the original Atlantis. And then as every successive, wave happened, if you think about that, 100,000 years ago is about 4 precessional cycles. 50,000 years ago is 2 cycles back. 28 or 25,000 would actually have been 1 cycle back, or 26,000 years. So these, there is something to these cycles of time affecting not only human consciousness, but the planet itself. And notice the fractured ridges. You can see this along this entire tectonic plate. And of course, this is south of Africa, but that meteor hit was quite strong. And this is because of what took down Atlantis in the last incarnation, and that was the hitting of an asteroid. What we found in evidence to this is along the Carolinas. Throughout the southeast where I live, there are these pock shards that were hit, that hit the land, and they're called the Carolina Bays because they're across 6 different states, including North and South Carolina, and they appear to be basically a comet or a meteor asteroid that broke up into thousands of pieces. So it would have hit Atlantis and then exploded in all directions, and it definitely hit the Americas. And they're estimating that it happened between around 9,000 BC. And of course, we're thinking that this Atlantis went down, roughly 12,000 years ago or 11,500 years ago. So it puts it right in that pocket. And here we can sort of see the extent of the Carolina Bays. This is what they're marking as the deep sea impacts. So Atlantis in that incarnation would have been, over here. And so the explosion went in this direction. What's interesting too is that scientists have gone down to the Atlantic seabed and they have found part of a former continent under the ocean, including seabed cores that they've taken up from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge in 1957, showing freshwater plants at a depth of 2 miles. And so we know that there were, this was above water at some point. The British Journal for New Scientist in 1975 reported basically that there was like an acropolis here in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And they found it from dredging samples along the lines. So, again, all this has sort of been covered up. Here again, we see someone's drawing of Atlantis at an earlier stage. What's interesting is it's on a 33-degree parallel. And that's what Atlanta is on, and that is what the Giza Plateau is on as well. So I live at a 33-degree latitude, and you can see a lot of these pyramids wind up showing up in that way. So we're going to take a look at the legend of Atlantis and what we do know. It was a large continent that then became a smaller landmass, maybe the size of Australia, by the time it went down the last time. And it went down around 11,750 years ago. That's what we're going by. We also have, hi, honey, I'm doing a presentation. I'll call you back. Thanks. We have Plato's story of Atlantis to go by, and this appears really in the Timaeus and Critias. And so we want to kind of briefly go over some of the extraordinary things he said. Plato, this is the historical background. Plato set the meeting of these four men at his friend Critias's house in June of 421 BC. The Timaeus, which is one of his writings, along with the Republic and other, begins on the day following the debate recorded in the Republic, and the men start by recalling their previous conversation. Then Hermocrates mentions a story derived from ancient tradition that his friend Critias knows. Pressed for details, Critias recalls how a century and a half earlier, the great Athenian statesman Solon had visited Egypt. Now, we do know historically that there was an Athenian statesman named Solon who visited Egypt around 590 BC. He went to the city of Sais, which was a very famous oracle city that was on the Nile Delta, north of Heliopolis and Memphis, but not on the coast. And so a tale that, though strange, is certainly true. Solon made notes of the conversation that he had with the priest and intended to record the story for posterity, but didn't do so. But instead, he told his story to a relative named Dropides, who passed it on to his son, Critias the elder, who eventually told his grandson, another Critias, the man who's featured in Plato's dialogues. In the Timaeus, Critias gives a brief account of what the priest told Solon. According to the ancient Egyptian records, there had been a great Athenian empire some 9,000 years earlier, at the time of Atlantis. At the same time, there was the mighty empire of Atlantis on a continent or an island west of the Pillars of Hercules. Now, these are the Pillars of Hercules, which are basically the Straits of Gibraltar. So it's west of them. That puts it in the Atlantic. So the continent was said to be larger than North Africa and Asia Minor combined. So that's quite sizable. To the east lay a chain of islands that stretched across the ocean to another huge continent. So that would have been part of the Azores and maybe some of the ones that are now under the water, like the Canary Islands, or they're still up. Critias goes back to the island's beginning when the gods were apportioning parts of the earth to one another. And Poseidon, and I thought you guys would enjoy this. I have several images of Poseidon, but this was the hottest one. I had to pick really a hot looking guy, and let's face it, this actor looks great in this role, in this costume. So Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea and also of earthquakes, was given Atlantis, and there he fell in love with a mortal maiden named Cleito. Cleito dwelt on a hill in Atlantis, and to prevent anyone from reaching her home, Poseidon encircled the hill with alternate rings of land and water, 2 of land and 3 of water, which he turned as with a lathe. So, he was an earth mover and an engineer and an architect. Plato tells us at the center was a holy temple dedicated to Cleito and Poseidon, who remained inaccessible and was surrounded by an enormous enclosure of gold. Nearby stood Poseidon's own temple, a superb structure covered in silver with pinnacles of gold. And of course, this is an illustration because we can't take photographs of it. This is another little older Poseidon, not quite so hot, but definitely an authority figure with his famous trident. The roof's interior was covered with ivory and lavishly decorated with gold, silver, and orchate. Now, we don't know exactly what that was, but it was supposed to be a combination of copper, I think, bronze and gold, or copper, bronze, and silver. And they've actually found some ingots of this off the coast of Egypt that they brought up that they believed to be this metal alloy that was used so much in Atlantis. All the other parts of the walls and the pillars and floors, they lined with orchalium. This is the one I'm talking about. Probably a fine grade of brass or bronze, which glowed like fire. We know it had copper in it, and I think silver or gold. Inside the temple was a massive gold statue of Poseidon driving a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses and surrounded by 100 sea nymphs or dolphins, which was so high its head touched the temple roof. Now, this is an illustration that actually was from Times magazine, and it really doesn't show the magnificence of the sea nymphs, and his head's not touching the ceiling, but it's still a beautiful depiction that gives us a little teeny glimpse into the possibility of what it might have looked like. Gold statues of Atlantis' original 10 kings, because Poseidon had 10 sons, and of course they had wives, and they ruled the 10 provinces of Atlantis. 10 kings and their wives stood outside the temple, and these were the 10 sons of Poseidon. Poseidon also laid an abundant supply. This is a hot one of him, isn't it? It's great. I love this one. Of abundant supplies of food and water to the hill, bringing up 2 springs from the earth, from beneath the earth. Again, we can see he was an engineer. One of the springs was a warm water, and one was cold, making every variety of food spring up abundantly from the soil. So hot springs, abundant. So water, it was a water culture for sure, just as Lemuria was. Cretius tells us of the beautiful buildings that were constructed around the warm and cold fountains in the center of the city. Trees were planted between the buildings, and cisterns were designed, some open to the heavens and others roofed over to be used as baths. So they had hot springs and they had baths, all sorts of, I mean, we don't have much of the public baths today, except if you go to a gymnasium or a spa or something. We have them in our homes, but they had them where men, women, even horses and animals could come. These were the kinds of baths for private persons which were kept apart, and the separate baths for women and for horses, for cattle, and to each of them they gave as much adornment as was suitable. And you see some of the same thing continuing in ancient Greece, where they had baths for the men, baths for the women, and so forth, and also in Rome. There were many temples dedicated to the gods, also gardens, places of exercise, some for men, others for horses. That's a beautiful image, by the way. Let's go back one second. Isn't that just beautiful? You see the water here and the temples, and this is really lovely. Again, a beautiful painting illustration, but, superb. And both of the 2 islands formed by the zones or the rings of water. And there's all sorts of depictions of this, and I'll be showing you a few more. Atlantis was rich with fountains, gardens, and with wildlife. A huge canal. Now, this is a cool image because it might actually depict sort of what it looked like. A huge canal, 300 feet wide and 100 feet deep, linked the great harbor with the sea at the southern end and joined the city to a vast irrigated plain sheltered by lofty mountains which lay beyond the city walls in the north. This rectangular plain, measuring 230 by 340 miles, was divided into 60,000 square lots assigned to farmers. So the mountains would have been here. And you remember me saying when I showed you that map of where of Atlantis from Dom and Her, where Poseidia was, that's probably where this would have been. At the center of the larger of the 2, there was set apart a race course or a stadium with about 607 feet and in length, allowed to extend all around the island for horses to race in. They loved their horses, and they had a lot of horse races, chariot races, and you can sort of see here how there would have been a water inlet and canals and sluices that would allow you to stay or go from all the inner rings. And this is from Dom and Her. Again, I always try to give credit where credit is due. And you kind of get a sense again, like if this is a pyramid, you see how little it is. So, and we know it was large. So these were large areas. The entire circuit of the wall, which went around the outermost one, they covered with a coating of brass, and a circuit of the next wall they coated with tin, and the third, which encompassed the citadel, flashed with a red light of orichalcum, copper or copper alloy. The stone, now this is from the Azores, by the way. The stone, which was used in the work they quarried from underneath the center island and from underneath the zones on the outer wall as well as the inner side. One kind of stone was white, another black, a third red, and as they quarried, they at the same time hollowed out rocks doubled within, having roofs formed out of the native rock. So the many wealthy villages of country folk, rivers, lakes, and meadows abounded in the mountainous area with all these waterfalls and springs. This is again all the Azores, supplying food for every animal, wild or tame, and much wood of various sorts abundant for each and every kind of work. The inhabitants of the mountains and the rest of the country were a vast multitude, having leaders to whom they were assigned according to their dwellings and villages. Again, all this is from the Azores. So this is actually part of the landmass of ancient Atlantis. These leaders and the farmers on the plain were each required to supply men for the Atlantean army, which included light and heavy infantry, cavalry, and chariots. Of the water they ran off, they carried some to the grove of Poseidon, where they were growing all manner of trees of wonderful height and beauty, owing to the excellence of the soil, while the remainder was conveyed by aqueducts along the ridges to the outer circles. And again, this is an illustration, but it gives you the idea of how the waterways and the fountains and the waterfalls were incorporated into the entire city. So it was very much a water culture. At alternate intervals of 5 or 6 years, the 10 kings of Atlantis met in the temple of Poseidon to consult on matters of government and administer justice. At that time, a strange ritual was enacted. After offering up prayers to the gods, the kings were required to hunt bulls, which roamed freely within the temple, and to capture one of these bulls for sacrifices using only staves and nooses. The bull was led to a bronze column in the temple on which the laws of Atlantis were inscribed and slain so that its blood ran over the sacred inscription. After further ceremony, the kings partook of a banquet, and when darkness fell, they wrapped themselves in beautiful dark blue robes. Sitting in a circle, they gave their judgments, which were recorded at daybreak on tablets of gold. So this is what Plato says of what he knows coming down 3 generations from what the Egyptian priest written history gave to Solon around 590 BC. What we do know is that Atlantis became, in its highest form, a spacefaring civilization. It had airplanes. It had probably dirigibles and other things like helicopters. And I've seen some of this in the Akashic records. It became, for a period of time, a star empire. In other words, we had Pleiadians coming here, Andromedeans coming, people from Arcturus, people from the Sirius system. So we became a part of the Galactic Federation for a period of time, which of course is dedicated to the enlightenment and evolution of all worlds. However, if a world falls out of alignment with that, they can begin to go in the wrong direction. And of course, that's eventually what happened. So we were seeded from different star systems. Not only were the Anunnaki here, but the Pleiadians and the Sirians played a very big part as well. And they were from star systems both close and far. Atlantis had huge landing ports, and you may have seen this if you saw Esperides' presentations. These were paintings, as I'm sure she explained to you, that were done when Falco, their leader, went back in time with a very famous illustrator. And these were, anthropomorphized statues, and these were landing helipads up here in the Atlantean waterways. So very, very interesting. They also had these underwater docking platforms. And if you caught her presentation, I'm sure she talked a lot about, they had like maybe 20 or 30 really beautiful paintings of this, including submarines, underwater ships that they had. And they had underwater bases, which we've started to contemplate doing that because 3/4 of our planet is water. The scale of their buildings was enormous. And I remember seeing this at Davenport for the first time, and this is a person. So, although we're building very impressive skyscrapers in our day, the scale of this is just beyond the beyond. And of course, they anthropomorphized the human form, believing that human beings have within us the spark of the divine. This was the entrance to their temple of alchemy. And this is, of course, a person walking by, but you can see all the beautiful, both male and female human figures encoded into this. And this is, of course, where the emerald tablets of Thoth were inscribed in the Atlantean halls. And those are that's a whole nother presentation that I have given before on the emerald tablets. And this was inscribed on the innermost floor of the temple, representing solar time, galactic time, the spinning of the, well, this would be galactic time, the spinning of the galaxy, and this would have been more lunar time or mortal, the phases of the moon. So, and you can see the central capital there. Atlantis also used crystals, much as we have started to do in the last 30 to 50 years, as part of their technology. We haven't figured all of this out, but we are using it in watches and computers and in some energy systems, but we haven't quite mastered it in the same way that they did. They used it both for spiritual practices in terms of opening up interdimensional portals where people begin to experience a level of oneness, but also in technology, much as we have begun to do in the last few decades ourselves. They had their nobles, their kings, their queens, their courts, they had their politics, just as human beings seem to do. But for the time that they were governed by the 10 sons and grandsons of Poseidon, they had agreements to never go to war with one another. In earlier phases, however, they did. They used these headdresses to denote their rank. Now, most of us don't even wear a hat. I mean, if you go back to the 1940s, people wore hats all the time. You go back a century or two or three or four, many centuries, people have worn headgear. The Egyptians wore headgear. The Sumerians wore headgear. But most of us don't wear it today. You know, we might wear an Irish cap or a baseball cap, but that's about it. But they used it to denote their rank. They had their wars during certain periods in the evolution, particularly the second or third evolution of Atlantis. And they had their loves and losses, their conflicts and their sufferings, because they were human beings, just like us. They also had a burial ground called the Valley of the Kings. It was in the west, just as Egypt inherited that same practice of putting the Valley of the Kings in the west for the burial of their royalty. And they had these flower gardens, although gosh knows why, except that they were obviously strong metal workers in gold and silver, electrum, and precious metals. And this is, of course, a beautiful picture of a noble lady in her quarters. This is again from Dom and Her, so thanks to them for that. So we're coming into the home stretch now. We have to ask what happened to Atlantis to cause its demise. From about 16,500 to 14,000 years ago, Atlantis did hit a golden age, but then they began to develop more and more technology. And like us, their technology and ambition outstripped their spirituality. And that, of course, can happen in a society if we get too big for our britches. So the Atlanteans, according to Plato, ruled over their central island and several others, probably the Azores and Canary Islands, whatever was there, and other parts of the great continent on the other side of the ocean. This would have probably been North, South, or Central America. And we certainly have evidence that there was a lot of travel there. I've been to a lot of places in these lands. And in Central America, there's all, like in Chichen Itza, there's, you know, these carvings of people, and they have headdresses from turbans like we find in the Far East, to Native American feathers, to headdresses that look like they're Sumerian or Persian, to Atlantean. So according to Plato, their vast power gathered into one, endeavored to subdue in one blow our country, meaning Egypt, and yours, meaning Greece, said the Egyptian priest, and the whole of the region within the Mediterranean Strait. Then their armies struck eastward into the Mediterranean region, conquering North Africa as far as Egypt and southern Europe up to the Greek borders. Now, this would have been before the Great Flood, when the Sahara Desert was not a Sahara Desert. It was a fertile field. And many tribes lived there. And there was actually a river that wasn't just the north-south Nile, but ran east-west. And they found remnants of this. After the Great Flood, where that area was covered in salt water and took a long time to recover, of course, it became a desert. So this is the era they're talking about. the Athenians, standing alone, defeated the Atlanteans. And this is one of the reasons why Egypt, which was pretty much a closed society in terms of letting people know their secrets, allowed the Athenians to come study there. They allowed, Pythagoras and Plato and Socrates and Democritus, or a whole bunch of famous Greek philosophers and teachers that the Egyptians trained in their temples, because they honored the Athenians for having repelled the Atlanteans that had gotten too big for the britches at this point in this battle, and it freed the Mediterranean. But afterwards, according to Plato, there occurred violent earthquakes and floods. And of course, there was a lot of volcanic activity on Atlantis. And in a single day and night of destruction, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in a like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. And that it was, could only be formed really, it was a meteor strike. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't times that there was a misuse of other technology. We hear about the misuse of crystals. So we hear about boring into the earth to harness the thermal energies, which could, of course, opened a whole crack in the earth that could have been a massive volcano. But Plato tells us for this, the sea in these parts is impassable and impenetrable because there is so much shallow mud in the way caused by the subsidence of the land. And as we can see, some of these ruins of various ages of Atlantis are very deep, and some of them are pretty shallow. And at that time, it would have been a more recent descent, and certainly some of them would have been probably on that ridge in the mountains. So what could have caused the destruction of an entire continent like this? A meteor strike. And it doesn't mean, again, that they were not misusing some technology. But the existence of Atlantis was explains so many anomalies that we have on this planet today. Certainly the legends of these ancient space travelers that we see all over the world and every culture of the world, generally referred to as the gods and the goddesses. Huge temples that are mathematically and precisely aligned with the sun, the moon, the equinoxes, the solstices, and of course the stars. The levitation of these monolithic stones that we can't even pick up today, 50 tons. The presence of megalithic monuments all over the world. Just watch, a few episodes of Ancient Alien, and it's just like one right after the other, after the other. The discovery of some 750,000 pyramids that we have now discovered all over this planet. Now, that is an astonishing number. And a lot of them are hidden in the jungle and are yet be excavated, but we've been able to find them with ground penetrating sonar. And these pyramids are all over the world. Who built them? We're not building them. We can say the Mayans were building them, but they appear in every place from Bosnia to India to China to Tikal to, of course, places like Chichen Itza and Egypt. And the legends of gods, these world civilizers who came from the stars and were here, some of them with their own agenda, but others were here to educate humanity, that brought us writing, mathematics, astronomy, astrology, iron working, metalsmithing, really all of the tools of civilization that we have were brought to us by the gods and goddesses. And some of them were very benevolent and spiritually conscious, aware, inspired, and loved humanity. And some of them just kind of wanted to use us for their own purposes and then, be done with us. So, and furthermore, this would, of course, explain, like the stories of the Holy Grail and King Arthur, that there was something very genuine that happened at this period of time. The legends of these lost continents, the lost continent of Atlantis, which remains like King Arthur's court in Camelot as a dream within us of the possibilities of what we can be when we reach a higher level. And of course, as a warning to our own age to not repeat the mistakes of the past, to not misuse our spiritual energies, our sexual energies, our egoic energies, and allow the planet to once again descend into an unconscious state. So even today, the legend continues to live on, acting as both an inspiration to us and also a reminder of what to do and what not to do in the evolving states of human consciousness. And so I want to end this presentation by just giving you a little information on me. My website is triciamccannon.com. This is actually my home telephone number, which I unplugged for this presentation. So you can write it down, but I'm in Atlanta on the East Coast time in America. And I've written 5 books, and you can just Google me on Amazon and all my books will come up, or you can also find them on my website. I do also have an online mystery school called the Phoenix Fire Lodge, and 12 of those classes that I taught over a period of about 14 years are on my website, and you can order them and I can send them to you one by one. They're each about 130 pages each. And I'm very much an initiate of the Great Spiritual Mystery Schools and have been a teacher of that lineage, working with the masters for many, many decades. And there is also the website of The Way of Truth, mysteryschool.org, that you can go to and read a lot about the teachings of these masters. And if it's something you decide you want to pursue, there's all sorts of written discourses on self-mastery and the ancient wisdom, on dreaming and working at a lucid or conscious state in your dream that you can certainly study. Simply, I think it's like $88 or $130 a year to join. So it's very inexpensive. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this.